We are headed into the weekend and next week, which is Thanksgiving week, culminating in Thanksgiving Day. We're going to take a look at what the weather is going to be like for the next 5 or so days and speculate on what could happen. And in the meantime, we have a special guest tonight as we will be talking about winter storms in New Jersey, the historic ones, with author Don Colgan. And that is all coming up right now, right this very second, on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. And you can support the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast if you shop on Amazon. Use the referral link that's on the description to this podcast. It doesn't cost you anything. Just use the link to get you to Amazon, do your shopping, and then Amazon throws us back a little bit of coin for sending you there. It keeps the live Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast commercial free. And for the weather geek in your life, there's a great weather station, Tempest by Weatherflow. Get the revolutionary Tempest weather system and join the fastest growing observing weather network on the planet. The link for this is also on the description to this podcast. And we have a very special Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast coupon code. Joe Rayo protects that coupon code with every hair on his head, doesn't he?
Well, I don't know. Rich Rockmansky has it on the chat board, but in case you don't have access to the chat board, it is autumn 2025. If you use that code in conjunction with anything that you purchase at Tempest, Tempest will be very happy to give you a 10% discount. So it's a good deal.
And finally, the link for this is pinned to the top of the chat board. We have on tonight, you can see him. I'll pop in a moment. But this is his book, Historic Winter Storms of New Jersey, written by Don Colgan, of New Jersey. And he joins us tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show podcast. And Don, welcome to our
thank you very much, Joe.
Abode here.
I'm honored to be on the program. I've watched it for many years now, and certainly appreciate the chance to come.
And you're still watching after all those years.
Absolutely, particularly with winter weather events. I'm glued to it.
Well, that's the theme of your book, and I have a copy because he sent me one here. Winter Storms of New Jersey. It's a good read, a solid read, and you know it's a fast read, which is really enjoying. And we get into a whole bunch of different storms that go back. I mean, your first one, you start off with. Hold on. Well, you should know which one you start off with.
Blizzard of '88.
Right, and clearly you were not there for the blizzard of '88. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one I took exception with when I wrote the book. I did my archival work with that.
I got you. Okay, so being that you're not, Dot is not a professional meteorologist, so he offers a different perspective, really, because you are the person that we speak to every night. Folks on the chat board, folks that are watching in the background, lurking about, and I'm curious. First off, I hate to almost sound Hollywoodish here, but what's your motivation? It's just there's the weather geek inside you. How did it come out?
Well, when I was a boy, I've been following winter storms with a passion, zealously, since I was probably 8 years old. My first memory was the December 12th, 1960 snowstorm, which dropped about 15 to 20 inches of snow in the metropolitan area. And I was 5 years old, and the snow was stacked up to about 10 feet high in drifts in front of my apartment house. But I remember I've got a good catalog of winter storms in my mind. The January 1964 major snowstorm along the eastern seaboard in mid-January. I even remember an inch of snow falling on April, I believe it was April the 2nd or 3rd, 1964. And I grew to love meteorology, but I couldn't pursue it. I had to take care of my family when I got a little older, and But I remember the first book I ever read was General Climatology by Howard Critchfield. And I read that cover to cover, and I began to self-educate myself as best as I could. And the passion grew. But what really launched it was the great Lindsay, what I call the Lindsay snowstorm on February the 9th, 1969. And that was it was a well-advertised storm in the sense that a major East Coast storm was predicted, and it was forecast to be primarily rain or snow changing to rain and maybe changing back to snow for the metropolitan area at night. And that Dr. Frank Field at the time had forecast that. The only forecaster who saw the potential for heavy snow was Gordon Barnes, late Saturday afternoon. And see, in 1969, there was no UKMET model or Canadian model or GFS or European.
There was nothing.
There was nothing. There was it was what Tex Antoine used to call. He would every once in a while he would say the machines. The machines say this, and well, that night Dr. Tom Nicholson was doing the weather on Channel 4. He did weather on the weekends, and I remember I was glued to. It was 36 degrees at 11 p.m. with a southeast wind, about 15 miles an hour. And I was looking out the window, seeing if it would have come in as rain or snow. And there was what they called a heavy snow watch in effect for just far northwestern New Jersey and the lower Hudson Valley and parts of Connecticut at the time. And wet snow began falling about 11:30 in big flakes, And the temperature was 36. And by 1 o'clock in the morning, the winds had become northeast, and it began to snow at the rate of probably an inch an hour and stayed that way through the morning hours. I went to church the following morning. There was already about 7 inches on the ground, I would say. But it was an intense storm, and apparently the center of low pressure as it bombed out was probably 25 to 50 miles farther east than the thought was. And the whole area experienced heavy snow. It took longer on Long Island. It came in as heavy rain, sleet, then snow. And even down to Atlantic City, before the storm exited, it changed to snow and accumulated a few inches. A formational storm. It paralyzed the borough of Queens. People couldn't get out of their homes for a week. And it turned the entire city against Mayor Lindsay. There was accusations that he only plowed the borough of Manhattan because he was a congressman from Manhattan before that. And he ended up losing the Republican mayoral primary. There was Republican mayors of New York on occasion. And although he was reelected in November because of the New York Mets. That's another story. But there was no communication between City Hall and the Weather Service. Everybody was blindsided. And what happened after that was there was more of a link. When a winter storm was about to impact the area between, I think, not just New York City, but it became more commonplace for there to be a communication so people could be better prepared and informed. But John Lindsay took quite a beating for that. Half the snowplows, I understand, were being repaired and weren't even in New York City. But that was one of the storms that was transformational. I think it altered the way metropolitan areas viewed approaching snowstorms and how they can better protect the public and inform the public.
Joe, you've got some memories of that.
Sure does.
Mr. Rayo.
I remember the night before, actually I was switching back and forth between Dr. Tom Nicholson, who, by the way, I ended up working for at the Hayden Planetarium. Dr. Tom Nicholson at one point was the chairman of the Hayden Planetarium, and then later moved up to being the president of the American Museum of Natural History. And he taught courses in navigation and meteorology at the planetarium. But I was switching back and forth between him. Maybe some of you out there remember there was a guy on Channel 5 at 11 o'clock, way back when on Saturday nights. He was a British gentleman named Morris Woodruff, and he claimed that he was able to predict the future. And people used to come and ask him to predict their future. The show was hosted by Robert Q. Lewis. I mean, these are names that, again, have been banging around in the back of my mind over the years. But in any case, that storm that Dan just mentioned, I used to put the weather on the blackboard at homeroom when I was going to junior high school 101 in the Bronx. I used to put the weather up on the blackboard in homeroom. And on that Friday, it was Friday the 7th of February, I used not the regular chalk, I used the pastel, the big fat chalk with the pastel colors, yellows and garish pink and blues and green. And I just put a big thing up in the corner where I put my regular forecast and said snow day possible Monday. And that people knew from knowing me and also going past that particular classroom about where they could get this weather. And that notation that I made that Friday, it went all over the school. Hey, Rayo's calling for a big snow on Monday. Hey, school may be closed on Monday. Rayo thinks it's going to be a snow day. And one of the people who saw the forecast and stopped me in the hallway was this very tall teacher. His name was Mr. Russo, Richard Russo. And he could be very intimidating because, again, he was a very tall guy. And he looked down at me and he said, "So you think it's going to snow on over the weekend? We're not going to have any snow on Monday?" And I said, "Yes, Mr. Russo." He said, "I saw Dr. Frank Field last night, and he's saying it's going to be mostly rain. Who should I believe?" And at that point, I just said, "Well, in weather, some of us look at the weather maps one way, another." Quite frankly, I'll admit it now. I was forecasting more with my heart than anything else. I really wanted a big snowstorm. Back in my younger days, I loved big snowstorms, and so I said, well, if it goes just a little ways and it takes the right kind of, And I used to do my forecast, by the way, using the New York Times. In fact, I had an archive, if you will. I started cutting out the New York Times weather maps every day since 1966. I must have had like almost 1,000 weather maps in a boot box. And I would do the forecast by sheer extrapolation and also by empiricism. And put the forecast up on the blackboard at school. And I went for a big snowstorm on Sunday that would lead to a snow day on Monday. I had no idea that it was going to end up the way it did. I mean, and I actually was annoyed, and Don may remember, and so Joe, you may remember this too, how early in the storm on radio and television, they all said the same thing. Well, it's snowing now, but don't worry, it's going to change over any minute to rain. Mm-hmm. And the main reason was that the winds would turn in from the east, bring in milder air from the ocean, and change the precipitation over to mostly rain. And so first there were 2 inches, then there was 4 inches, then there was 6 and 8. And finally, when there was like 8 or 10 inches on the ground, I don't know when or what, they just threw up their arms, the Weather Service did, and said, and Frank Field, they called Frank Field in. He didn't usually work on Sundays. Usually, again, it was Dr. Nicholson. I don't think Dr. Nicholson was able to make it to the studio on that Sunday because he lived in New Jersey. So it turned out that Frank Field was called in, and Frank looked a little PO'd that he, number one, had to work that day. And number two, Frank at one time did work for the Weather Service as a forecaster, but he was getting a lot of his information now from 30 Rock. NBC, which is still located in what was then the RCA building. I believe now it's not the GE building anymore. I think, I don't know what building they're calling it. But in any case, that skyscraper still houses Channel 4. It also used to house the National Weather Service or the U.S. Weather Bureau. And Frank would get his forecast basically from there. And at one point in the afternoon, they just said, we don't know when this is going to end. We have no clue. This was a total and complete surprise. And again, New York, I think, probably ended up with a lot more. The official total, I think, was something like 15 inches. But as Joe has mentioned on innumerable occasions here,
bar tops.
What they did back then was just simply step outside the RCA building with a ruler and just measure how much snow was on top of
Because the
cars.
snow that fell between 50-story high buildings is certainly measuring it there would be incredibly accurate.
Yes,
And,
exactly.
and landing on a ground where heat is coming up from the bottom between the
Yeah.
subways and all the other special things that they
Yeah,
have
I
around.
believe Kennedy Airport had 24 from that storm.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is that here in the lower Hudson Valley, and I can't even imagine seeing this today, but back then, with the old Tappan Zee Bridge, even though now it's called the Cuomo Bridge, people still call the new bridge the Tappan Zee. 1,000 cars were abandoned on the Tappan Zee Bridge. Nobody could get anywhere on the Tappan Zee, so people just left their cars on the bridge and walked off the bridge because the snow was so deep and no one was able to do anything about it. It was an incredible, paralyzing storm. And the bottom line of it is there was indeed no school on Monday. There was no school on Tuesday. There was no school on Wednesday. And finally, I think Thursday they opened up the schools, but by then only a handful of kids went for the last 2 days of the week. When I
And
got back to school, when I finally got back to school, I ran into Mr. Russo, and Mr. Russo says to me, he says, and I was like the conquering hero, by the way. I was there like, Rayo, you really did it. Hey, my God. But Mr. Russo had the best line. He said, you ought to go into weather. You ought to be a weather forecaster. And I said, well, when I go to college and I take the right courses, he said, I'm not talking about college. You should go right now. You had the best forecast. You were even better than Dr. Frank Field. And so that was my like Dan. That was my memorable storm. That really kicked things off for me, and from there, we had other great storms that came during the '70s, and I'm sure we'll get into that here tonight on this discussion.
Don, there's two storms that I want to bring up that you have in your book among many others. But one is well, the blizzard of '78, which you refer to as the Alan Casper snowstorm. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, there was two major snowstorms in 1978. The second one on February the 6th was the actual blizzard of 78.
Right.
But the first snowfall, which was January the 19th, I believe, that was another storm that was forecast to be snow developing and changing to rain. And
Changing quickly to rain.
quickly to rain, yeah. And I was working at an electrical distributor in Middletown, New Jersey, when the snow began during the evening. But snow developed, it became heavy. 8 became 9, 9 became 10, 10 became 11, and there was about a half a foot of snow on the ground, and the forecasts were amounts were being increased by the Weather Service. I don't remember any warning being issued. If it was late at night. But there was about 4 inches by 9 and about a half a foot by 11, and that's when Alan Casper came on as during that time, and he said that if I remember correctly, the temperatures in the upper levels of the atmosphere over Atlantic City were beginning to warm to the point where the snow there would change to rain. And the rule of thumb was when snow changed to rain in Atlantic City, about 5 or 6 hours later, it would reach New York City. And it never did change to rain. We had about 13 inches in Elizabeth, where I lived. I do remember it ended as a period of freezing drizzle that Friday morning.
Right. And I remember that show too, because that's the line I remember about
Mhm.
Atlantic City.
Yep.
So do I.
That
And
that always stayed with me. So
just
it's
think it reinforced what a remarkable meteorologist he was and is, and beyond iconic. But that's a great storm and a great story, and it also ended a period where we hadn't had a major snowstorm, a big snowstorm,
well, the
since
Lindsay snowstorm was the last one, but until
yeah,
the
till
'78.
that
Yeah.
one. There was one in 1975 in February where I think we had about half a foot of snow, and that was probably the biggest one. But other than that, it was a very benign period where the winters were
I remember
12,
there was one in
15.
February of '72. It was mostly a heavy, wet snow that changed to sleet and rain. We had about maybe 5 inches of slushy snow.
Oh, that storm. I
And
remember that storm so well.
it was on a
February
Saturday.
I think it was the 18th.
Yeah, Friday night, Saturday morning, or Saturday, and that that
Well,
was
I was, go ahead. I
yeah that
was
was
delivering newspapers then. And that was a storm where there was actually a winter storm watch, because they were calling it winter storm watch by then, issued for the metropolitan area. And it was really a battle between the rain and snow line, and as to where that low would set up. But late that Saturday night, Tex Antoine, he came on and he said, the latest information, the machines say now it's going to be, the storm is going to hug the coastline, and it's going to be a period of snow changing to rain, and a windy, rainy Sunday into Sunday night. And well, the snow did develop around midnight, became heavy at times, and I had to deliver newspapers Sunday morning, which means I had to get up at 4 o'clock. I was what they called a runner then, on a truck, and there was about 2.5 inches on the ground. It was snowing very hard, and the snow then began to change to sleet, change back to snow, became a wintry mix, changed to rain, changed back. It alternated all day long before ending as a period of snow Sunday evening. Kind of a remarkable storm that I never saw the rain snow line dance like that, but area to the west did get significantly more. And you were right, there was exactly that. 5 inches fell in different intervals.
I also remember that storm because Sunday into Monday, the storm intensified to such a degree that I never saw this again. They actually had two low pressure centers that was up over eastern Canada, and the gradient was exceedingly tight. Mm-hmm. And we had very windy conditions in the aftermath of that storm, Sunday into Monday and Tuesday of the following week. So we didn't get really all that much. I mean, we did get some snow, but what stands out in my mind more was the wind and the cold that came in the aftermath of that 72 storm. You're right. By 75, we were so strapped for a big snowstorm. In fact, if you go on the News Radio 80, there's a site, and I don't have the link here, unfortunately, but it's called the News Radio 88 Appreciation Site, and it was put together by Don Swain, who was a reporter for many years on WCBS News Radio 88, of all of the different major events that CBS covered right up until literally when they said goodbye to everybody last year. On that site, there is the storm of 1975, which fell on Lincoln's birthday, February 12th, 1975. Gordon Barnes was the neurologist then, and he and the thing that you find interesting here is that he upped the totals. So through the course of the day, the totals kept going up, as he was looking at the data and refining his prediction. But that storm overall gave, I don't know, something like 5 to 7 or 6 to 8 inches.
Yeah, it was exactly that.
And it was major because we hadn't had a storm like that since the Lindsay storm of '69, and so that was it was like, wow, this is.
And what was unique about that storm also, and again, that was another morning. I was doing the morning route. It came in as sleet, even though temperatures were in the upper 20s. I think it was 28 degrees, and it sleeted for about 2.5 hours, icing everything over. It was painful, and then it turned to snow. And then, in fact, who was the AccuWeather forecaster? I remember him actually giving that forecast. Was it Joel Myers at the time? So I had to.
Well, back in those days on 1010 Winds, you could tune in and hear Joe Sobel or Dr. Joel Myers.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Joe Sobel didn't get. Joe Sobel had always been a PhD, but neither he nor Joel Myers would ever use the term doctor. But then after the Dr. Bob incident in the late 70s, all of a sudden Joe Sobel and Joel Myers suddenly became Dr. Joel Myers and Dr. Joe Sobel.
So, Don, of all the snowstorms that you write about, and there were quite a few here, which one for you was the defining moment? Which one was your favorite?
Well, honestly, I'd have to say it was the Lindsay snowstorm as far as that kind of fortified my interest in meteorology. But the most, in terms of societal effect, I'd have to say the blizzard of 1888. I think it's hard pressed to find a more powerful winter storm, uh, uh, with the exception perhaps of the Great Atlantic Storm of 1962, had it been all snow, but that was a rain snow event. But the event, the center of low pressure intensified deeply, and then it circled back, and it snowed from midnight Sunday, I believe, well through the day on Tuesday, and at heavy and then lesser intensities. And that was another storm that came in as a light rain that Sunday
Right. It's
afternoon.
actually started and ended as rain. I
Yeah,
mean, the temperature went from above freezing at the start. It got down to, I think, single digits in between, and then by the time it was over, it was 34 and rain. I mean, remarkable to experience like a swing like that.
it's hard to tell. They said there were 20.9 inches fell in Central Park, but who knows? I mean, I've seen remarkable photographs of snow, and it could have been 30 inches. But that storm, that's the reason why subways were built underground. And,
Right.
and
The Boxing Day storm in 2010 was one that particularly hit New Jersey very hard.
yes, yeah, that was a classic nor'easter. That was one of those storms. Yeah, the megalopolitan blizzard of '93, the
80.
blizzard of '96, and the blizzard of February, President's Day blizzard of 2003, and the Christmas weekend storm of 2010. They had one common thing. They were all very, very intense areas of low pressure that emanated from the Gulf Coast region, a lot of Gulf moisture involved. But there was Arctic air in place, significant Arctic air with all of those storms. And with that particular storm, there was initially considerable doubt as to how far that axis of heavy snow would move. Would it move into New York City and southern Connecticut and the lower Hudson Valley, or would Philadelphia and Washington and Baltimore get the heavy snow? And I remember Lee Goldberg came on because the snow developed on, I think, Christmas night, early the following day. But on Friday night, which was Christmas Eve, Lee Goldberg came on with new information, and he was very bullish now that New York City would get, at that time, he was forecasting 6 to 12 inches of snow and 12 to 18 over central New Jersey, but it morphed into a 2-foot snowfall for many locales and extreme intensity and sustained meeting. I believe it met the blizzard criterion with ease. But that was quite a storm.
Snow geek all the way through, aren't you?
All the way.
Some final thoughts, sir?
Well, this upcoming winter, like
Sorry.
you often say, you want to forecast with your head, not your heart. We haven't really had a major snowfall since February of January 31st and February 1st of 2021. A couple of decent ones in there, but it seems that with the ENSO, the way it's structuring itself, and the weak La Nina, that we may be positioned for more snow this winter. All the pieces have to come together, though. And
Well, we can't wind up getting any less than we have in the past 3 or 4.
yeah,
So,
that's for sure. I mean, that's for
uh,
sure.
yeah, I'm just curious. Also, being that we're all about the same age, um, so we've seen huge changes in how information is delivered and how it's digested. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, did you like it better when you were kids, or do you like it now where you can just, you know, pretty much get totally bombarded with
Yeah. Well,
maps
first
and
of all, the
videos and
problem
all the rest of it?
The problem with now is you don't know what's real and what's not real sometimes in terms of information because I mean you can go onto Facebook and somebody's got a map with a 20 inches of snow for New York City on December the 3rd and a big dialogue. You don't know what's real. You got to trust. You got to trust dependable sources like yourself and Joe and some of the other regional meteorologists who are well established. But when I was a kid, it was more fun. And it was, I used to wait for the revised forecast from the National Weather Bureau. I had this little Japanese transistor radio my uncle gave me, and I'd be delivering papers, and I'd have it clutched to my ear to wait for that 5:10 forecast when there was a rain snow event. And, it was fun. And that's how I accumulated knowledge, by the way, through reading, through exposing myself to people like Gordon Barnes, people like Dr. Frank Field, who I was very, very fond memories of. It's a passion that grows and grows, and I wish I could have been a meteorologist, but I've come fairly close, and I do respect my knowledge. I think for a non-meteorologist, I can handle myself in terms of forecasting if I had to.
Well, you do good.
I mean,
You do.
Tex Antoine was not a meteorologist, and in fact, one day in 1947 or 48, he was an announcer for NBC Radio, and he had a very good voice. And television was just coming into its own back in those days, and they called him in and said, starting next Monday, you're going to be our new weatherman on our new TV newscast that was premiering, and good luck. And he came up with the idea of he was a very artistic fellow, and he thought that he would do the weather by showing pictures and graphics, and he cut out of an orange crate a character who he later would refine with magnets and whatever, Uncle Wethby, Weth for weather,
Well,
B for bureau, and he actually learned over time, Tex did, how to forecast. Like, for example, he used to notice how there would be occasions when, and he would get his forecast from the Weather Bureau, which was in the same building, as I said, with as Channel 4. And he noticed that there were a lot of times when they said, well, we're going to have, the front is going to come through, but we don't think it's going to be much, so we're going to call it, it'll come through, but it's not going to produce anything aside from a cloud or two. And it actually showered. And after a while, Tex would tell the audience, well, officially, this front is not going to give us anything. But you have to remember, a front is a front. And I always call that Antoine's rule. Regardless of whether or not the front looks like it's bone dry or whether or not it does have the capability of bringing any precipitation, heck, call for a shower. and more often than not, Tex was right and the Weather Bureau was wrong back in those days. He also, sometimes a front would stall right over New York City. And he would call a situation like that the 125th Street cold front. He said, those of you who live south of 125th, those of you who live south of 125th Street, you're probably going to stay mild with maybe a few showers. If you live north of 125th Street, it'll be noticeably colder, and there may even be a little touch of snow. He would come up with these he'd make a commentary about the weather. He also would notice how so many of the weather records, the record lows, the record highs, the precipitation, the snowstorms, all came during the 1930s. And so he called them the dirty 30s.
Yes.
and after a while, I mean, he wasn't a meteorologist, but in his own way, Tex learned the climate. Tex learned about the quirks of New York City and area weather. And in 1961, he actually won an Emmy for his presentation. In fact, I saw that Emmy. I had the great pleasure of actually going to Tex Antoine's apartment, 975 Park Avenue, I might add. And I saw the Emmy. And the Emmy actually was not to Tex Antoine alone. It was to Tex and Uncle Wethby as the team. They did that for, and he was,
that's remarkable.
he was the most popular weather forecaster in the New York metropolitan area in the 1950s and into the 60s until then they started. Then he asked for more money at WNBC, didn't get it. ABC gave it to him. So in 1966, he moved from NBC to ABC, and that opened the door for Dr. Frank Field, who became a celebrity in his own right because he started appearing on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson made Frank Field a national figure. Everybody learned who Dr. Frank Field was, and to his dying day, Frank Field said, I got to thank Johnny. Johnny was the one who made me famous. Otherwise, I would have just been another weather forecaster and doing occasional science reports. Johnny used to rib endlessly Frank Field. Frank, he would do his monologue on the Tonight Show. Johnny Carson did, and he said, "Winter begins when? Winter begins tomorrow, doesn't it? Does anybody know the exact time?" And a couple of minutes later, Ed McMahon would interrupt in the monologue and say, "It starts tomorrow at 5:34 a.m." And he said, "Where'd you get that information?" Dr. Frank Field. Frank Field? Dr. Frank Field told that information. Can we get a second opinion? And that's what. And when Frank Field would be on the Tonight Show, Johnny would have water dumped on Frank Field's.
Yeah, I saw those clips.
So it was a whole different time back then. The weather was entertainment more than anything else in the 1960s. Then, of course, as we got into the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, weather became no longer just a fun thing. Weather, if you remember back in the 60s, if you watched your local news at night, weather was the last thing. It was news, sports, and at the bottom of the hour, just before the show newscast ended, it was weather. Then they bumped it up to the middle part of the show because weather was becoming more and more important. People, on Long Island, for example, losing their homes because of beach erosion or the potential for severe weather, flooding, and whatever. And all of a sudden, weather today has catapulted to number one. I mean, how many newscasts now give you the top news stories, the top headlines? But then before we get into that, let's go to Lee Goldberg and what's happening, Lee, or Lonnie Quinn. Lonnie, there's a big weekend coming up. All of a sudden, weather has become the most important thing on television newscasts. Weather drives the news. It was not that way 30, 40, 50 years ago, but now weather has become a very important.
Well, it's a relief from so much of the bad news you get, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The book is Historic Winter Storms of New Jersey by Don Colgan. The link for this is pinned to the top of the chat board on Amazon. You can get it there. And it's in bookstores, right?
Oh yeah, it's in Barnes and Nobles, and a lot of local bookstores have picked it up in New Jersey. So it's out there.
Great. Makes a great stocking stuffer. If you've got the stockings on my fireplace are big enough that we could put the whole book could slide right in. So there it goes. Historic winter storms of New Jersey. Don, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was really
my pleasure.
enjoyable. Joe and I are going to wrap the show up and do some local weather, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you both very, very much. It was an honor.
Oh,
thanks very much, Don.
Our pleasure.
Great book, and again, a great stocking stuffer. And if you're a weather weenie or a snow weenie, even if you don't live in New Jersey, this is a great book to have.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. So Joe and I are going to get into some weather that's going on, and we will go from there. And here's your look at what's going on, warnings and watches wise tonight. It's actually pretty quiet, but there are some exceptions. So we've got flash flood watches up tonight in central Texas and a few warnings as well. Some winter weather advisories in a couple of counties in southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, and eastern Utah. We have flash flood watches again in southwest Arizona, right near the Mexican border, and also in southeastern California, in the desert areas. A couple of counties in the mountains in southern California with winter storm warnings, and we have winter weather advisories up for the Sierra Nevadas. And Joe, you had a pretty decent day today, correct?
Yeah, it was. In fact, it was a rather lovely day out there. I don't know what the high temperature was. I didn't get a chance to look at it on the web, but it It was fine. I was outside this afternoon, walking around. I'll tell you what made the difference. The wind machine has finally been turned off to a significant degree, and even if it's a little chilly out there, it still makes for a nice afternoon, especially when the sun is out. Beautiful day out there.
And we've got still got high pressure that's kind of uh, sitting right along the coast tonight and keeping a hold on the drier air. But you can see there's a frontal boundary to the west, and that is going to be pushing eastward. And we also have another one of these little lows coming out of the southern plains. When we go down into toward Texas, I mean, this is where we're getting Pacific moisture, subtropical moisture that's coming in and has produced some pretty hefty rainfalls during today and into this evening. They extend up into parts of Oklahoma. Now, some of it has actually even moved further east. And you see the flow here and the rotation that is back in New Mexico. This is actually a fairly halfway decent shortwave. All this Pacific energy that's been coming in, they're pushing eastward. But the problem is that we still have this sort of blocky pattern, and everything is getting suppressed, and there's still not much, if any, room for these weather systems to develop. You can see there's another system that's moving across the northern Great Lakes and up into the Canada side, and that's pushing eastward. So that's really acting pretty much as a weight on all of this. It tries to come east and lift northward, and it can't. And the systems generally start to weaken and fall apart. And meanwhile, there's still more energy in the west, another strong upper low dropping down the west coast. And you see the clouds are going in a counterclockwise fashion around that upper low. Here's the radar tonight. Quiet in the northeast and mid-Atlantic states. We do have some rain that is actually spread into western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee, and then we go back into Texas when we actually have some bands of very heavy rain starting to exit now in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It's been there for hours. A few flash flood warnings showing up as well. We have a line of heavy showers and maybe even a couple of thunderstorms to the west of that. And that's with the upper low that's pushing east, and then an east-west band of rain from southern Kansas on into Missouri, and some convection going on in southern California. The radar's busy here. Looks like some thunderstorms are rolling through Los Angeles right now, coming in off the Pacific. Rainfall amounts for the Northeast, a quarter to a half an inch, and that also extends down into North Carolina, dries out with nothing in Florida. And with what's going on now in the southern plains of the Ohio Valley, we have anything from an additional 3/4 of an inch to still an additional 2, 3, or 4 inches for north central and northeast Texas and into southwest Arkansas. Some heavy rains also with what's going on in southern California and Arizona, where we're looking at areas of 3/4 of an inch to as much as an inch and a half, and as well as the Pacific Northwest. Um, Joe, I don't really have anything new from the standpoint of how I'm thinking about the next few days. It doesn't look like, Friday night into Saturday morning just looks like the same as what happened the other night. Weak system goes to the south. Maybe we get a little bit of rain, and then it goes away. And then the weekend, the rest of the weekend looks pretty decent. And then the next weather system in play is probably going to come Tuesday night, I'm sorry, late Tuesday night into early Wednesday, with a cold air mass behind it. If this works out, I mean, Thanksgiving Day should be okay. But I'm noticing now that the models are wrapping up. At least the European is deepening a low near James Bay, and the gradient gets kind of tight for Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah, the thing is that Getaway Wednesday, I had on the forecast for the lower Hudson Valley early clouds, possible showers, followed by some late day breaks of sun. But the cold air advection, I think, will be slow to move in initially. I actually have, Joe, on Wednesday of next week, temperatures becoming very mild. I went for a high on Wednesday, close to 60 degrees, believe it or not. But then on Thanksgiving Day, you're right. The winds are going to gradually begin to pick up. It'll be turning much cooler, maybe about 10 degrees cooler on Thanksgiving Day as opposed to Getaway Wednesday. And Hey, look, the parade with the big balloons starts officially at 9 o'clock in the morning and is usually done by noontime. My hope is that the using the criteria of sustained winds of 25 and gusts to 35, that we don't start approaching that until the end of the parade, and maybe by Thursday afternoon it will indeed be rather windy or breezy and noticeably cooler. So hopefully everything will work for those who are putting the parade together and for those who plan to attend the parade, and we will have good weather for that. And again, the day before on Wednesday, again, maybe some showers, I think, early, left over from Tuesday night. But again, it could get very mild. I think before the day is over, we could see temperatures again well up in the 50s on Wednesday. Take advantage of that, because that may be the last really surge of mild weather that we may see around here for a little while, and it'll turn colder again during Thanksgiving and on into Thanksgiving weekend. I did on Facebook, by the way, Joe, I did post a special long range updated forecast for the lower Hudson Valley. We probably go for also for most areas. I said for Thanksgiving, partly sunny skies, highs along the Sound Shore 46, inland 51, and at Grandma's house 75.
Don has left. There was a question for him. I'll see if I can pass it along, Harold. I'm sorry I didn't see it on the chat board until after he had left. So, um, you know, I
Are you
always,
sure he's left? Because I see maybe
you
he's
know,
not
it's
using video.
yeah, he didn't close the box out. Oh, there, he's still there. Okay, never mind. He is here. So, you did have a question, Don. Harold Olson wants to know. He wanted to know if you were familiar with or you remember the tightly wrapped storm of January 22nd, 1987, which was a good bust for where he is. I'm not exactly sure where Harold was. I actually remember that because that was one where uh, it wound up with about 8 inches when everybody was forecasting an inch or two. I was working for News 12 at the time, and I was really happy because my forecast was correct. But you just wanted to know if you have any recollection of that. Don, are you there? No audio. You got to turn your
No
audio
audio.
on. He's got to turn his audio on. Did you mute yourself? You're muted.
You're muted, Don.
Let me see if I don't know if I can unmute him. Uh, you have to unmute.
I
There
think
you
I got it
go.
now.
There he is.
You've been unmuted.
Well, yes, I do remember that storm. It was the first significant snowfall since the megalopolitan blizzard, first big snowfall anyway. And that was a low pressure system. I think that fired northward from the Florida coast and just roared up the eastern seaboard. I think New York City had 9 inches, and
Yeah,
there was a 10 or 11 inches on parts of Long Island. It was a very substantial storm that was not. If I remember correctly, there was some anticipation of it, but not to that magnitude, where 8 to 10 inches of snow fell. But it was quite a snowfall, inch
yeah.
an
I
hour.
yeah, I remember that because the actual low center passed near Islip, and it was like a tight
Yeah,
little, I mean, very, very tight, wrapped up little ball, and you didn't have to stray very far from where the center was, where you went from 45 and rain to 30 and heavy snow. But it was a very interesting. Never haven't seen anything quite like that since. That was a very unusual, unusual
there
situation.
was there was one more, and this was the snowstorm of December 31st, 2000, which brought a pretty healthy amount of snow, probably in the 12 to
December
16 inch range.
December 30th, Don. It was
30th, December 30th, 2000.
Saturday. It was a Saturday morning, and
Yeah, it was a Saturday morning,
I
exactly.
remember it well because my boss called me and said, and we normally had, very light coverage on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings. You get this phone call at like 5 a.m. saying, "Hey, we want you. We need you to come in." At the time, with that storm, I was still living on Long Island. I was in Levittown, Long Island, and so My trek had to go from Levittown to Yonkers, where News 12 Westchester was. And let me tell you, a more white knuckle trip you can imagine. When I hit the road, we already had that morning at like 5:30 or 6 a.m. We already had like 5 inches of snow on the ground, and I had to travel from Long Island over the Throgs Neck Bridge up to Yonkers in that type of weather, and it wasn't fun. Let me
Oh,
tell
absolutely.
you.
We
Yeah,
got
that
to
storm.
go ahead,
Yeah,
Don.
that storm was very tightly wound. Also, I think I even at the end of my book I have a listing of storms that didn't make the cut, that weren't historic, but they were very impactful, and that's one of them. That storm raced very quickly. It dumped that snow in a period of I think 10 hours, but I almost call it a winter tropical storm the way it developed and moved on.
I just want to acknowledge really Joseph Carr hit the tip jar. Thank you, Joseph. Most appreciated. And Scott Briller hit the tip jar. And he would like to know, the chairman, do you remember any significant ice storms in New Jersey? I mean, it's really been forever since that we've had a significant ice storm.
Hmm. In the winter of 1993-94, January 1994, I do recall there was a snow event that quickly changed to freezing rain, and that persisted for several hours. And it was about as much as I've ever seen in terms of icing, because usually freezing rain events in our area are short lived. It's around 32, 31
Right. I
degrees.
mean, I in that in that 94 storm, I remember where I was on Long Island. It was freezing rain with a temperature of 12.
Yeah, yeah. You
I
had
mean, it
mentioned
was
that actually before.
really it
And
was something I had never seen before and have not seen
that was a prolonged
since.
period of freezing rain, too. Otherwise, you get freezing rain for a couple of hours, but not
Yeah,
12
to
or
have
16 hours.
right. Yeah, that was extreme. Just really quick, because a few people were going crazy, semi crazy on social media because the European last night had a rain to snow or snow, mostly a rain changing to snow event for Thanksgiving weekend. And just to let everybody know that today's
Yeah.
European has cold and dry and kiss it goodbye. So, and that's
Wah,
probably the
wah,
way it's going to
wah.
go. All right, we're gonna wrap it up since WCBS News Time is approaching 8:30 on this the 20th day of November. Don, thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure.
Mr. Rayo, you have
Yep.
any parting thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, we'll be back on Sunday, and I believe on Sunday we've got another author that's expected to be
Yes,
on.
Sunday. Thank you for reminding me. Sunday, we're no, not this Sunday. The Sunday after Thanksgiving. Harold Olson, thank you for banging
Oh,
the tip
oh,
jar.
I'm
Most
sorry.
appreciated. No,
Yeah.
a week from Sunday. So the Sunday after Thanksgiving, we're going to have Ben River of Angry Ben's Angry Weather
Mm.
and his book Angel in the Storm. And
Wonderful book.
yes, yes, definitely, definitely is. And we'll have him on. We'll have him on after the holidays. So time to say goodnight, and we'll see you all on Sunday.
And
Absolutely.
Nighty
thank you,
night.
Harold.
Good
Thank you,
night,
Harold
Joe.
Olson, for hitting the tip jar last
And
week.
Harold Olson just hit the tip jar. Yes, thank you, Harold. So we'll see everybody on Sunday.